And welcome back. We're going to go ahead and look at an example where we can have throwing of exceptions. Now we're going to go ahead and look at this with a very similar thing that we just saw with our high scores class. So I went ahead and created this class called Quick Game, and you can see it's based off this Quick Game structure, which is very similar to what we saw with our high scores class. But of course you can see I've separated out the two classes from the main so that we can go ahead and focus on how these methods might change. Whereas if before this was still part of the same class structure, where here it's not. And you can see I went ahead and created another exception here, which is this invalid score. An invalid score is just looking to see if an invalid score is entered, whereas no score is seeing if there is no score. And the way this works is if you look in here, we actually have a different way that this is handled. And you can see the way this is changed is we have this throws no score exception, and we have an invalid score exception. So one of the things that you might encounter when you start programming with exceptions is you might need more than one exception to handle things appropriately. So in here, we're looking to see first off if the score has been set. So if it has not yet been set, it's first going to attempt to say like, hey, there are no score values. If there is a score set and that score is set to 0, or should we say less than 0, we're going to throw an invalid score exception. Otherwise, we're simply just going to return that score. And that's all with this get method here. So if we look at this with our main, we of course are creating the high score. We're attempting to get that score. We're going to print out the message, and then we're going to enter in scores and then return it. So if we run this as is, we get first off the score is not set. Then we're saying we're entering in 3 perfect scores to the game, and we get the message 300. All right, awesome. Now what if I were to change this? So let's just go ahead. I'm just going to go ahead and cut out this first block, and let's change this to entering in 3 scores for the game. And let's just go ahead and do this as first score is 100, but then let's do a minus 100 and a minus 100. Now that should technically get this score to go negative. Let's go ahead and run our code, and you can see we get that is not a valid score. And you'll notice that this is handled not with the no score yet exception, because it technically does have a score. Instead, it's caught here with this invalid score exception. And it's very important that when you set up your exceptions, remember you always want it to be which one do you want to catch first. So we always are, in this case, looking to see first if there is a score that has been set. If there's not, then we're going to go ahead and look to see if it's an invalid score. In this case, we say this is not a valid score because if we look at how the quick game classes, we have this else if statement that says if the score is less than 0. And if we follow our code, we say we're setting the score to 100, then it's negative 100, which takes it back to 0. And then we do a minus 100 again, which means that this score is now going to be a negative 100. And if I change just this last one back to 100 and rerun this code again, you'll see we now get the value of 100 because we are no longer in the negatives now, all right? Because now we're doing a 100 up, 100 down, so these two cancel each other out, and we're letting off with a score of 100. If I go ahead and change this to a score of 0, though, and I rerun my code one more time, we of course get the value of 0 because it is not less than 0. Because how we set this up is that we said it has to be less than 0. So anytime we hit a negative number, that's going to happen. And of course, this is just an example of how we can use exceptions to kind of handle different things. Now, could I take this same program and handle this without exceptions? Yes, you can do it. But there are times when you want to use exceptions because there's going to be different scenarios or different situations where you might want to have that programmed appropriately. Remember, one of the things we talked about last time was this idea of event-driven programming. And in here, we're using the events, which in this case is the scores, to really dictate whether or not we want to use an exception versus just have that handled traditionally with how we've done our programming methodology up to this point.